Okay.
All right, the date is Wednesday, the 9th of June, 2021. It's 7:03 in the evening. This is a meeting of the Trail, Sidewalks, and Bikeways Committee. To conduct this meeting wholly electronically and to effectuate both the emergency procedures authorized by FOIA and the emergency ordinance, this committee needs to make certain findings and determinations for the record. It's a bit cumbersome, so I ask you in your advance for your patience. Audibility of members' voices. First, because each member of this committee is participating in the meeting from separate location, we must verify that a quorum of members is participating and that each member's voice is clear, audible, and at an appropriate volume for all of the other members. Accordingly, I'm going to conduct a roll call and ask that each committee member participating in this meeting state your name and the location from which you are participating. I ask that each of you pay close attention to ensure that you can hear each of your colleagues. Following the roll call, we will vote to establish that every member can hear every other member. I'm the representative at large and the chair. I'm Ken Comer, calling from my home in Springfield. Braddock District, Mr. Cosgrove. A response, I assume he's probably going to join us in a few minutes. Hunter Mill District, Mr. Rubb. A response. Mount Vernon District, Mr. Klein.
I am here in my home, suffering from near heat exhaustion from a ride home.
Dranesville District, Mr. Smith.
This is Wade Smith coming from my home in the Dranesville district.
Thank you. Providence District, Mr. Foster. No response. Mason District, Mr. Albright. Response. Springfield District, Mr. Liebert.
This is Carl Liebert for the Springfield District, coming to you from Burke.
Thank you. Lee District, Mr. Pipkin.
Chair, this is Stephen Foster from Providence. I'm sorry, I couldn't get off mute for a second, but I am here.
That's okay. I try to give you enough time. So, this response from Stephen Foster from Providence District. Lee District, Mr. Pipkin.
Yami Pipkin coming from Lee District.
Thank you. Sully District, Ms. Amka. No response. Clifton Horse Society, Ms. McDaniel.
Katie McDaniel calling from my home in Oak Hill, Hunter Mill District.
Thank you, Katie. Fairfax Alliance for Better Bicycling, Mr. Newman.
I'm sorry, this is Sean Newman calling from Springfield District.
Thank you. Fairfax Area Disability Services Board, Ms. Cohen. No response. Fairfax County Federation of Citizens Associations, Mr. Tipton. In response, he told us he was going to unavailable. Fairfax County Park Authority, Ms. Beth Iannetta.
It's Beth Iannetta calling from my home in Fairfax.
Northern Virginia Builders Industry Association, Ms. Portia. Response. Northern Virginia Regional Park Authority, Ms. Reese.
It's gone.
I thought she wasn't with them anymore.
Yeah, so that her spot is still vacant. We're waiting for them to fill it.
Bear with me while I update my Word document. And WABA, Mr. Albers.
Howard Albers from Fairfax, Virginia.
Okay, I move that each member's voice may be adequately heard by each other member of this committee. It is our practice to approve this and all subsequent motions by acclamation, so I will ask now if there are any objections or nay votes. Hearing none, the motion carries. Second, having established each member's voice may be heard by every other member, we must establish establish the nature of the emergency that compels these emergency procedures. The fact that we are meeting electronically, what type of electronic communication is being used, and how we have arranged for public access to the meeting. Therefore, I move that a state of emergency caused by COVID-19 pandemic makes it unsafe for this committee to physically assemble and unsafe for the public to physically attend any such meeting. And that as such, FOIA's usual procedures, which require the physical assembly of this committee and the physical presence of the public, cannot be implemented safely or practically. I further move that this committee may conduct this meeting electronically through the Cisco WebEx video conferencing platform. This format will also provide a dedicated phone line. The public may access this meeting by going to fairfax.webex.com and entering event number 173-371-2385 and password trails 2021, or by calling 844-621-3956 and using access code 173-371-2385. It is so moved. I will ask again if there are any objections or nay votes. Hearing none, the motion carries. Finally, it is next required to establish that all of the matters addressed on today's agenda address the emergency itself, are necessary for the continuity of Fairfax County government, and or are statutorily required or necessary to continue operations and this discharge of this committee's lawful purposes, duties, and responsibilities. It is so moved. I again ask if there are any objections or nay votes. Hearing none, the motion carries. Before we begin the agenda, first let me see if any other members that might have joined us late.
Ken, this is Bob Cosgriff calling from my home in Fairfax, Virginia.
Okay, so the recorder will update that Mr. Cosgrove has joined us. Anybody else?
Debbie Cohen, calling from my home.
Okay, Ms. Cohen. Thank you very much, Debbie. We'll again.
Sorry, trouble logging in.
Oh no, that's why I did this. Anybody else?
James Albright, Mason District.
Great. Update that James Albright has joined us from the Mason District. Anybody else on the committee? Next, let's have the staff who has joined us identify themselves.
This is Nicole Winans with Fairfax County.
Thanks, Nicole. And David, I assume you're here.
Oh, FCDOT.
Anybody else?
Chris Wells, FCDOT.
Chris? And that's it. Good. Now let me ask if there are any members of the public or really anybody else I have not asked for or identified has joined us. I note that we have no members of the public here tonight. We tend to monitor somebody, everybody take a look, make sure we don't have somebody join us later, and we'll give them the time that we traditionally give later in the meeting if somebody does join us. But as of right now, we won't have to do that. Okay, so that having been done, we can move to the agenda, which you all should have as a PDF. And the first item on the agenda, David, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk to us about the BAC meeting policy update.
All right, thank you, Ken. So as I alluded to in my email, excuse me, email to the group the other day, in anticipation of the possibility or perhaps likelihood that the state of emergency that is in place by order of Governor Northam with regards to COVID-19 is sort of, I guess, anticipated that it will be lifted at the beginning of July, or maybe it expires at the end of June. It's in some manner we've been informed that it is likely to no longer be a state of emergency officially in Virginia, and because of that, that means that we no longer have the authority to conduct these virtual meetings. Like the WebEx platforms, or before that when we were doing it, the conference calls, we were allowed to do explicitly as a result of the state of emergency. So we will be, our understanding, as has been told to us by our higher ups, is that we are required to return to in-person meetings. So that's sort of the short version. Happy to take any questions. The other thing that will go along with this is I sent out I sent out the remote participation policy that the board will need to adopt, and this is for board members only. So not board members, committee members only. So it does not apply to members of the public. It does not apply to staff either, and it dictates the manner in which members of the committee may participate remotely going forward. And at this point, that essentially means just to call in. And it's intended to be sort of just an exception to normal attendance. And so there can be, committee members can call in or can request you need to call in for personal reasons a couple times a year. I believe it's either 2 or 25% of the meetings, whichever is greater. So I'm not actually sure which one. I guess the 25% would be greater for us, depending on how many meetings we have. Or for medical reasons or medical family reasons, those sorts of things, and there's no limit on medical reasons for calling into the meetings. But again, that will at least as of now be sort of like the exception, and will be done by this conference call line. It will not be we will not be simulcasting meetings, so we're not going to have like an in-person meeting and also a WebEx meeting at the same time. So that's sort of the state of EAC meetings in Fairfax County moving forward.
So a couple of questions occur to me. I think everyone's probably thinking about that. First of all, somebody's going to have to reserve a room for us.
Yeah.
That
will be, I believe staff is responsible for that. So we will getting a room. We will get a larger room than we used to use, or I've been told we used to use, and I've actually been to an in-person meeting of these. But we will be getting a larger room to accommodate like social distancing and those things.
And the room will have to have some form of conferencing capability. Is that correct?
Yeah. So we'll have we'll get. This will need to be worked out with, I guess, the facilities management, specifically how to reserve rooms that have conference call lines if they don't all have conference call lines. That's something I'll certainly be working out in advance of the next meeting.
Right. So in advance of the next meeting, we expect you to publish not just the room number, but the phone number for whoever it is who's going to call in, people who call in if they need to. Another question is, what's a quorum?
I'm not sure offhand, but I guess a quorum is a quorum defined in the, I guess like the authorization policies of the board or something like that?
Wade has a little bit more history on this than I have, but I think we have been very non-specific about defining a quorum. We will hold a meeting if even a few people, we'll call it a meeting even if a few people show up. We are not particular, especially since we're such an advisory, we take on such an advisory capacity, we don't approve anything. That we if it's in the middle of a snowstorm, if 3 people can make it, then we'll call it a meeting. And Wade, can you correct me if I'm wrong on that?
You're talking to me, right?
Yeah.
You know, I don't really remember. I think though we've always required a quorum to vote if we vote on something, but if we're not voting on anything, I guess a quorum is irrelevant.
Okay.
Hey,
But,
Ken, this is Bob. I'm looking at the bylaws online here, and it says a quorum consists of a majority of members.
Okay.
So
See, there we
that's
are.
the answer. One more than half.
Okay.
And I'll note that remote participation, I believe, is not to count towards a quorum. So somebody calling in does not count towards a quorum.
Yeah, you have to have the quorum to approve their remoteness, according to what you sent us.
That's correct. That's the problem I have, is that we don't know if we have a quorum until we get there. So I don't want to be in a position where we don't have a quorum, somebody dials in, where do we stand with that policy? What happens then?
Well, I would presume that having a quorum is sort of like the anticipated outcome. I would think that not having a quorum should be a rare event in sort of, extenuating circumstances, like a snowstorm or something like that.
Yeah. Well,
I don't know if. Sorry, go ahead.
County government generally shuts down when snowstorms, so that's actually a bad example. Okay. Well, I tell you what, I absolutely intend to cross that bridge when we get to it, and not before. So we will assume that everybody's smiling face will show up in July. I'm going to have to talk to Bob about this, but actually I'm going to miss the July meeting, both remotely and otherwise. So Bob, you're going to be the first one leading an in-person meeting in a year and a half. And that having been said, something for everybody to think about, by the way, there's a bit of a tradition in our committee not to have an August meeting. I got no strong feelings one or another. We don't have to talk about it tonight, but be prepared in July to start talking about whether we will have an August meeting. So that's
I have a question. The state of emergency is not lifted yet. So do we know we'll be meeting in July in person? I mean, probably, but we don't know when they're going to lift the state of emergency in the state.
Right. That is sort of the other point. This is, I guess, we're trying to prepare in the event that the state of emergency is lifted, which sort of what we heard kind of from on high is that is what we expect to occur. But if the state of emergency is not lifted, then we will be meeting virtually again. And I guess at some point, I guess we'd have to just make a decision as to, some cutoff point. If we only have like 2 or 3 days notice that the state of emergency, if it's lifted 2 days before the meeting instead of on July 1st, and then perhaps we just do, the virtual meeting as we had set out to plan, and not pivot to the in-person meeting on short notice like that. I guess the other option, and not to sort of, as Ken was saying, you've, I guess, often in the past not held an August meeting. The alternate, which could, I guess, provide some clarity, would be to skip the July meeting and then have the meeting in August. And then we'll have more time, I guess, just from now until then, with regards to just clarity over the state of emergency and how the opening is going to look like and meeting in person is going to look like. Not to say that you shouldn't have the July meeting if that's what you want, but that could, I guess, be an option to like sort of smooth the transition a little bit. I'm just gonna look up when the second Wednesday of July is.
It's the 14th of July. It's that's field day.
Okay. Right. So it's not super in conflict with July 4th or anything like that.
Nope.
But if we have any French members, then
Well, let me while we ponder that, let me open the floor. Are there anybody else who has any questions about the remote policy as it was published?
Ken, can I ask a question?
Yeah, please.
David, so I'm a little confused as to why this board is working on its own distinct policy rather than a county-wide policy associated with boards and commissions. I'm not opposed to what we've suggested. It just seems odd that we're going to have like 30 commissions. They're all going to have slightly different rules.
I don't know. I'm not sure there will be different rules. I mean, it's not like I drafted up this policy. This policy was handed out, and I sort of filled in the blanks to make it specific to the Trail, Sidewalks, and Bikeways Committee. I think the intent is that the policies will essentially be the same, across the BACs, but I guess each BAC is required to have its own policy by, I guess, state law or county policy. I'm not entirely sure, to be honest. But yeah, that's sort of how it has been dictated to us to do it.
Okay. So
yeah, this is Bob again. My reading was that this was done by the county's attorney office, that every BAC got it. In fact, the BAC phrase appears down in that document. It doesn't say the TSB. It talks about all boards and commissions and so forth. So I think this is just downloaded, as David said, from the top, and he adapted it, and we have to approve it, as does every other of the 50 different commissions that the county has. That was my take on this.
And if I missed a BAC, I was supposed to turn into a TSB. I can fix that for later. I'll give it a second check. Thought I hit them all.
Was there another? There was another question that got cut off. Is somebody else have another question?
Yeah, and this is Chris. I would just add, this is the purpose of this, approving this language is to allow for the occasional remote participation by members. Without this language approval, it would just be back to 100% in person.
Right. Yeah, you either come or you don't. Right. Yeah. And I'm making the assumption that there was no board action that actually created this policy. This is the county attorney trying to thread the needle between the no virtual meeting policy, no telemeeting policy, and allowing for occasional call-ins. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty accurate description. Again, just, they were very clear to us that this is not to provide some, electronic meetings or hybrid meetings at all going forward. It's not intended to provide a way for the public to participate remotely either. Any members of the public or any members of staff or anyone who wants to attend that is not on the committee, it will be required to come in person for what we've been told. Is, I guess, the county attorney's interpretation of the state ordinance. Similar to how it was before the pandemic.
I have a question. just in terms of logistics, there's a lot of steps in order to request that. And so whoever will be chairing the meeting may need, because it says on or before the meeting, and it doesn't just time before. So anytime before, I guess, 7 o'clock, the person has to get a hold of either Ken or whoever's chairing the meeting, who we don't always know ahead of time, to work through that. So just be aware that we might need to have a way to get a hold of somebody, whether we, in architecture review board, they had the phone number of the room that we were in, so that if someone was late or needed or couldn't make it there, they'd call in and say they couldn't make it. So there's a lot of steps to go through to get this remote call in. So just be aware of that.
I think logistically, the ideal way to do it would be to just have the phone line open no matter what. And then if any board members need to call in, then it's there. And yeah, the policy, it is pretty clear that you can give essentially no notice in advance of your inability to make it, nor do you need to provide the reason for your inability to make the meeting in person. You're not. So, but because of that, because you can inform the committee 10 minutes in advance that you're not going to be able to make it. I think the only way to practically be able to accommodate that would be to just have the line always for every meeting, and have the number in advance.
You have to put all the reasons in the minutes too. So you have to give a reason, you have to have it approved. The committee then has to then verbally approve the approval, and then all that has to go in the minutes. As it's written.
Yeah, I guess as was told to us was you don't need to be like specific. If you can't attend for personal reasons, you don't need to say what your personal reason is. If you can't attend for medical reasons, I think you need to say if like you're not able to attend for a medical reason as opposed to a personal reason. But I don't think you're not required to say what the specifics of the personal
it says a personal matter and identifies with specificity the nature of the personal matter.
Oh.
4A.
Okay, I guess I am mistaken. I don't know. I thought, Chris, not to put you on the spot, but I don't know. I just feel like in the meeting we had with our policy team or whoever last week, am I just totally misunderstanding what they had told us, Chris, or do you remember, or do you not recall? Not to put you on the spot, sorry, Chris.
Well, rating for
Delay.
Chris.
There it goes. Yeah, there's a delay when I hit unmute on my phone. No, I think actually Sean is reading. I have it in front of me, but if Sean read that part the way it's saying,
I'm reading from the document
it is saying that the specificity.
Yeah. It says that you don't have to validate if the requesting member is unable to physically attend the meeting due to a personal matter, the requesting member must state with specificity the nature of the personal matter. The requesting member is not obligated to provide independent verification regarding the temporary or permanent disability or other medical condition or the family member's medical condition that prevents their physical attendance at the meeting. So you don't have to verify a medical condition or family member medical condition, but you do have to describe with specificity the personal matter.
Yeah, specificity not being in it otherwise defined.
Not specifically.
So yeah, so I stand corrected. My apologies. Thanks for pointing that out.
Since it's apparently my prerogative to accept specificity, like I'm out of town works fine for me, or something very something that's obvious, anything that satisfies a reason for me would be adequate. I don't think we need to put You know, we don't need to go crazy about this. And as for whether you have to do this beforehand, I'm reading the first paragraph says, on or before the day of the meeting and at any point before the meeting begins, the requesting member must notify me, or in my case, I have to notify Bob, that they're unavailable. So apparently you can't do it during the meeting. You have to do it up to the moment of the meeting. And an email with a time notify. You don't need my approval. You need to notify me. An email to me with a timestamp of 6:59 or earlier will satisfy that requirement.
Yeah, but
You
I think
don't-
if you read down, you have to, the committee, I think then has to affirm your approval of the, there's more steps.
Yeah.
There's lots more steps in there. So it's
Yeah.
like the committee has to then confirm your approval or disapproval that's is meeting the policy, and then like it has to be recorded in the minutes as well. There's more to it.
Yeah. I'll follow up with Beth on that. I read this thing and, you know, I'm not averse to legal documents and instructions and so forth. But this is clearly, as David said, made to make clear that people are supposed to be at meetings in person. And if they're not, they're putting the thumb screws on everybody with approvals and this and that and the other thing. This is my personal opinion. If you can't come to the meeting, don't bother calling in. Just don't come to the meeting and then come next month, because you're just creating problems. This is very complicated. It's just, you know, ridiculous in that sense, but it's for a good purpose. They want people to meet the VFOIA requirements of public meetings. So that would be my personal take. If I can't come to a meeting, I'll let Ken know I'm not coming to the meeting, and I'm not going to bother logging in remotely. I would suggest that be our policy, formal or informal or otherwise.
No, I don't think that can be the formal policy, because this is going to be the formal remote participation policy.
Yeah. What I'm saying is there shouldn't be remote
be honest.
participation. That's it. We should either be there or not be there. Forget the telephone remoteness, because that's going to be a complication, as Beth's pointing out, minutes and approvals and specificity. It's just, you know, why bother? Just don't be there.
So to me, I would disagree with you, Bob. I think that the onus on this, I mean, the amount of actual work is, hey guys, I can't make it tonight. I'm going to dial in. At the beginning of the meeting, the chair says, hey everybody, Sean is dialing in tonight. He gave this reason. Do we approve it? Everybody raises their hands. No, whoever's doing the minutes writes down, Sean is approved to attend remotely. And then, you know, and we can hear him and we move on. I mean, I don't think this is going to be a big deal other than the IT side of it.
You know, I think the purpose of all the constraints on this is just to keep people from abusing the allowance that you can call in. The point is, you got to have a good reason to call in. If you don't have a good reason, then it's like Bob said, just don't come. But it's to keep people from just saying, well, I don't feel like being there tonight, I'll just call in. I think that's the reason behind all this.
And there's also the limitation of how many you can actually do that for. 2 or 25% is a pretty low number.
Well, that's specific to personal reasons, like the non-medical reasons, the 2 or 25%, whichever is greater. Which, if we have 10 meetings a year, would be 2. Depending on how you round, I guess.
Yeah, this is Jim. I think we can either reject this or accept it, and I guess I'd like to just make a motion that we accept it and move on. I mean, this is kind of crazy. I mean, we're given this, it seems like, and we don't really have a choice. So I think it seems reasonable. Let's just do it to Sean's way and let's move on. So I make a motion that we accept the policy.
I second.
So, motion on the table and a second to accept this, and I guess incorporate it into the board's, into the board's. You don't have like list of instructions or whatever, but accept it into the board's policies.
There's a correction, David, there's a correction in the closed session there. It says if the BAC, you might want to change it to TSB.
There it is. I don't think we really do closed sessions. But
we have a provision for doing closed sessions in our charter, I believe.
okay. Thanks for that catch. So I will resend this with that correction, and then this will be what is posted online. I guess. However you want to specifically vote. I could set up a little poll if you want to vote, or we could do just take turns and do a voice vote. Whichever way you all wish to conduct the voting on the motion that is on the table.
Let me do this perhaps quickly. Is there anybody who objects to that motion? And I'll pause for a little bit longer than I normally do because people might be struggling to get to their mute button. So I hear no objection, and I believe the motion then carries by acclamation. And we can move on. So if anybody has any questions with regards to this, they can probably do email David, and because he's going to have to check with legal if there's anything that really requires deep interpretation, of course. PC me and Bob, of course, and Beth, we'll deal with them going forward. But, this is what everybody's going to live with, and so it is what it is. And we'll see how it works once we start meeting in person. Okay, happy to be moving on to Nicole and the active Fairfax plan, which we also have an attachment for.
All right, thank you. Let me share my screen. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, great. Go. Can you see the Word document?
Yes.
Great. All right, so I don't have a formal presentation, so I just want to go over the document that I emailed out, I guess yesterday. I hope all of you, or most of you, had time to read it as well. It's a few pages, but just for some background, what this is all about and how this fits into active Fairfax, the active Fairfax project. So the safety was its own topic very early on when we started to develop the scope for active Fairfax. It was originally at the end of phase 2, kind of as an outcome of everything that the project had, developed and as part of recommendations as one of those standalone outcomes that would have guided our work in the future. But then the Board of Supervisors, I think one of their first sessions early last year, directed staff to expedite the development of this safety framework. So we moved it to phase 1 and provided the funding that was needed to get it done as part of phase 1. So now here we are as part of phase 1, having done some groundwork, having done the existing conditions, community outreach, crash analysis, and having this document as really meant to be a framework. Hold on, I think I'm actually looking at the wrong document here. Hold on, let me just. Yeah, this is a draft. Hold on. That's the next one. They look very similar. They have the same. Let me stop share, and I think I have to share again the other document. That looks so similar in the small thumbprint you get when you try to share something. Okay, I may have to actually close the other one so it doesn't get confused.
So I opened what you sent us.
Yeah,
which
there we
is
go.
A draft safe streets. The first thing is, yeah.
Yes, here we go. Yeah, I had both of them open because I wanted to show you the other document as well in the next agenda point. Now I have to go find it again, but it doesn't allow me to toggle between the two windows. It just tells me I have two Word documents to open, and then I guess it just chooses one. Anyway, so this is the one I sent out on the Safe Streets program plan. So again, this is again with the vision and goals that we talked about last time. This is the second kind of big outcome of phase 1. And originally we called it the Systematic Safety Program Plan, and we changed it to Safe Streets Program Plan to make a little bit more clear what this was about and the wording a little bit less technical. I think this is pretty straightforward what we're trying to do. And just to give you a context of what this is supposed to be. So it's not a Vision Zero policy and it's not a Vision Zero action plan. So what we're trying to develop here is something like an internal or you know, not to say internal, but you know, a framework or a business plan nearly for a program that would be run by Fairfax County that will start to develop action steps towards Vision Zero or safe streets. You know, there are many terms for the same thing, which basically is trying to make our roads safer for all users systematically. So not just address, you know, the high injury locations or where we have fatalities. And of course, that's something that we have done for years and it's very important, but systematically change our transportation system to make it safer. And that's, of course, not a small task in Fairfax County due to our scale and due to the fact that we don't own our roads. So we have, of course, the need to coordinate with VDOT and a lot of other stakeholders in the county, and it's really a group effort. So this is a framework that will help us get started with a couple basic steps that we can take right now. And then there are other steps that or actions that are a little bit more of a heavy lift, either because they involve funding that currently doesn't exist or staff capacity that is currently not available, either at FCDOT or somewhere else. So it's basically a menu to choose from both internally, but also from the Board of Supervisors, and kind of work towards developing the policy or developing, you know, more than one policy. But if you wanted to adopt an safe streets or Vision Zero policy, that would be a recommendation, for example. So if you look at the document that way, I hope it becomes clear what we're trying to do, and that this is not a commitment to every single step by the county or the Board of Supervisors that's listed here, but it gives us an idea of, you know, what do we need to work on or can we work on in order to improve safety and hopefully eventually will eliminate fatalities on our roadways. Do you have a question?
And Nicole, this is Bob.
Mm-hmm.
As you dive into the meat of the table there, there's several initials for agencies which were not clear to me. You know, I can understand FCDOT and VDOT, but there were several others. So as you go through that, could you just sort of break those out and let us know what they are, like NCS and OCE and some of those other alphabet soup things, because they're not obvious to me for sure.
Right, sure. Yeah, and the final doc, so this is a draft document for easy review. So the final document will have, you know, some of the crash statistics as well. So it will be more of a report and we'll have the glossary for all these terms as well. So yeah, I can point out the different partners that will likely have to play a role in the achievement of each of those individual recommendations. And I have to say, this is a very fluent document. The one I'm going to share today is not the same one that I shared with you yesterday. We met with Tom Bishatny this morning to discuss some of these things, and I've received some good feedback from Fab since yesterday that I incorporated. So it's changing every day. So I'm showing you the most current version, and I'm sure tonight or tomorrow I will make the changes, and it will be different. So the plan is to get a lot to go through the review with the different committees right now, and update the document, and then have a final draft basically available for presentation to the board transportation committee at the end of the month, the June 29th meeting. And then based on that feedback, make updates and then open it up for public review over the summer, with board action currently planned for September. And then potentially in phase 2 of Active Fairfax, we can start maybe addressing some of the low-hanging fruit recommendations, or even outside of Active Fairfax, with some, because not everything here requires funding, or some of it can just be done internally with available staff. So really quick on the principles of safe streets. So they're listed here. That's from a international view. As you're probably familiar with Vision Zero, the Vision Zero concept, or safe systems, safe streets concept is originating from Europe, but it's now accepted worldwide. And the basic premise is that people will make mistakes. You can, implement as much education enforcement as you want. People just behave unpredictably, and crashes will occur. There's no way that we can prevent road crashes. However, we can make them less harmful. So recognizing that cars or drivers in cars have higher protection than people that are walking and biking and not having protection around themselves is an important step, and that we all share the responsibility, not just the users of the system, but also the engineers and the planners, and creating a system that, recognizing that mistakes happen, that those mistakes are not fatal. And there's a lot of information online and interesting videos to kind of demonstrate what that looks like. But this is kind of the basic premise. So I don't think we have the time to read through all these studies, the recommendations one by one, unless you really want me to go through. But I can point out the structure. So what we have here is the governance and management segment, and you see the objectives and action items that are listed, the recommendations. There is a column for lead agency, but in most cases is FCDOT. Then the next column has the partners, and I'm just going to go through them so you know what those are. So BRS is obviously the Board of Supervisors. OCE is the Office of the County Executive. And then we have DPWS, which is our Department of Public Works and Environmental Services, and they do our sidewalks and trail maintenance, and that's why they're really important. As part of this, let's see, NCS is Neighborhood Community Services. So when it comes to equity or reaching our low-income target groups, they're a great partner because they already have boots on the ground. Let's see. I mean, FCPA, Nova Parks, everyone will know. CTB is the Commonwealth Transportation Board. Not exactly sure how they relate to the General Assembly, but I guess if we do transportation policy at the state level, it goes through that board in one way or another. So they are a partner that we need to work with when it comes to statewide issues like funding, for example. Yeah, National Park Service, NPS. Let's see if there's another one. FCPD, we all know. HD is Health Department. COG is Council of Governments. OPA, Office of Public Affairs, I believe. So they do a lot of the kind of county level outreach and PSAs. So when it comes to targeted campaigns, they're really an important partner. DMV will know. I think that was it. Is there any other one that you saw that you weren't quite sure? Oh, DPD, Department of Planning and Development. So it used to be DPZ, I believe. Now it's DPD, but they do the activity center plans, the comprehensive plan, revitalization. So they actually do a lot of active transportation planning in our urban areas that is not done by FCDOT, even though in coordination with FCDOT. I think that's it. And then on the right here, we have the column on implementation time frame. And this is not sorted by the importance. All of these are important. So we started out trying to assign priorities and realized nearly everything is a high priority. So what we decided on in the end was to basically assign the likelihood of implementation more or less in the how easy is it, like how heavy is the lift. So the short term is something that either doesn't cost much or doesn't necessarily involve hiring more staff or creating new staff positions, or it could be done potentially by just one agency. If it involves funds we don't have yet, or staff we don't have yet, or a lot of partners and buy-in from those partners, we're looking at medium and long-term goals. So it's really kind of like the how easy is it to implement some of these. And right now we don't have much staff capacity to take on a lot of these. Even though they sound easy in theory, we barely can keep up with our current workload as is, and adding even one or two of these would be a huge load. So under the governance and management, we kind of talk about the staffing needs and the funding needs to, starting out with, it would be great to have a staff position to run the Safe Streets program. It would make the program much more successful, but that's something we need to ask for and then wait until we get it. But then other things like establishing a task force to oversee the program, maybe to get some of an outside staff power to have this task force start working on some of those elements in support of a future staff person. That's something we can do right now because it's not adding a huge burden to our existing staff capacity. Then some of the other things here is that you see a lot of safe routes to school, mentioning of schools. So we have started talking to schools. They actually reached out to us to see if we were interested in a shared safe routes to school program. So we had a great discussion. So that coordination has already started with some ideas on staffing on both sides. And some of the funding needs. So right now, for example, there is no safety funding in the county, no dedicated safety funding. That's of course something we will need to ask for in order to even implement any sort of safety improvements because of the way our funding is structured. So you will see funding mentioned multiple times in this segment. So I just want to stop here and give you a second to review what it says if you haven't had a chance to read, and then answer any questions or any suggestions, anything that's missing here, or any comments you may have.
Nicole, I have a question.
Sure.
One of the problems I always had in applying engineering principles to bicycle safety is I just think our data collection's inadequate. You have accident data, but really, as we've discovered, it has to involve significant property damage. It almost always has to involve a vehicle. And otherwise, there's not going to be a police report, and it's not documented. It doesn't enter into the stream of documentation for road accidents. And there's no separate stream of documentation unless Beth collects accident data from, say, the trails and parks. There's no sidewalk accident data. So Is there anything in here that would, I don't know, create data from which we could make decisions as to and allocate? Really, the whole issue here is long list, limited money. How do we allocate resources best, and how do we know that we've been allocating them properly by following up next year, the year after, and see if things are getting better or worse? But in the end, we have no decision substrate to work with in terms of the data stream that would allow us to do analysis of what's working and what's not working. So is data collection in here anywhere?
That's a really good point. So our data in active transportation is always insufficient, both like how many people are out there, how many people use active transportation to get to work or runs severely undercounted, as are the crashes. So we have some crash data, as you mentioned, that's flawed and limited. I think there's something in here about crowdsourcing for dangerous locations, creating a map similar to the active Fairfax feedback maps that allows the public to crowdsource any sort of issues. So we can be a little bit more specific to highlight crash locations or near misses, so it could be used for that. And we have also heard that local community partners are also collecting near miss data. The Fairfax Safe Streets, Families for Safe Streets group does their own collection, so we don't necessarily need to duplicate that, but use it if the data is available by others to do this type of effort. But again, what this whole program is about is not necessarily reacting to crashes, but basically predictive analysis of where future crashes could occur. And that's a lot more difficult. Yeah.
I'm just doing allocation of resources. You know, because there's a long list here. Much of it's going to end up being unfunded. And so how can we make a recommendation to get the biggest bang for your buck, Fairfax, in terms of improving safety? So we all agree safety is important. How do we go through this long list and say, well, okay, this has the potential to reduce accidents in an area where they're biggest, whereas we don't have much documentation of accidents of this sort, of this nature, that we have to so we're you know, if you have a choice between spending on one versus another, it's always going to be the denominator is how much it costs, of course, return on investment. So that's also going to be a consideration, but it's useful to get the measure of effectiveness, as you and I both know. Let me explore a little bit earlier, because a question I asked a little bit earlier, because I pick on Beth because I just rode this trail today. The Accotink, Lake Accotink Trail south of Lake Accotink, the one that goes around like used to be a disaster in terms of roots and rocks and that type of thing. My understanding was somebody hurt themselves on it, and you went in there with a bulldozer and removed all that stuff, and it's just a delight to ride now. But it's an example of a safety improvement that was made. And I have to wonder, did that happen just because somebody came forward and said, you know, I hurt themselves, and who knows, legal might have been involved, whatever. Or he said, hoping against hope, that you actually collect some data on people who hurt themselves on county trails that would help with something like this. Is that, where do you stand?
So for that incident, I don't know the specifics that you're talking about, if there was an accident or if it was just regular maintenance. So for the trails team in the planning and development division, we do not track accidents on trails. Someone could have been at a park and said, hey, there's this thing happened over here, and the maintenance staff, or if we have a very complicated system of who's in charge of what park, depending on the type of park. there's staffed parks, there's unstaffed parks. So there's maintenance crews, there's staff at parks. So someone could have complained, the maintenance crew would have taken care of it. So, or it could have just been routine maintenance. So it's a complicated bag for a large system. And it could have been a number of things, but as far as I know, we do not track data and incidents on the trails that I am aware of for planning purposes.
I would be willing to bet that most of the places where those incidents happen aren't tracked either. I know that my daughter has fallen on that section of trail on the south of Lake Hecking, and I got her up and wiped her off, and we went home and didn't, call into the parks department. So there likely is not a significant amount of data provision of that. Yeah.
There's also a perception of what you feel is dangerous. So I get flooded with emails all the time about fair weather crossings, and people feel that they're dangerous, but it just depends on the user's interpretation of what they feel is dangerous. So there's some, subjective take on what people consider dangerous, especially for a crowdsourcing effort that you're considering.
Yeah, and we always have to be mindful when we rely on crowdsourcing that it's a certain type of crowd that we reach, and it's not necessarily the one that's most at risk. So relying on more objective data, such as the readily available crash data, but also exposure data, and systematically improving high-risk corridors, not just spot locations, is definitely an approach. And then specifically targeting equity need areas that we have identified through our analysis as high risk, but also looking at the type of accidents. So is lighting a common denominator, or is it a right turn, or whatever it is that kind of stands out? Sometimes can help prevent. If you go through the system systematically, and one thing we, for example, do right now is when paving is done, we systematically review all the bus stop locations to see if they are in safe places or if they could easily be moved to a safer location. And that's an approach that will help prevent, crossings, pedestrian crossings in unsafe or undesirable locations. So that's a slightly more equitable approach than just relying on calls or even an online map. But it's a multi-pronged approach. It's important to get that information from others as well.
Nicole, I have a question. So how does this, and I just want to put, how does this fit into the overall funding proposal that's eventually going to be for the Active Fairfax plan? Just briefly, how does this entire effort fit into that?
In short, there's not going to be a funding proposal per se. So it's not a funding plan that is attached to Active Fairfax. There are going to be some project recommendations, kind of like the top 20 sidewalks or top 20 trails that are kind of recommended for future funding as part of the TPP or whatever grant program, like the TAP we are taking advantage of. But there's not going to be a overarching funding plan for the entire Active Fairfax plan. So that's true for the safety program as well. So it's a little bit more piecemeal than that because of the sheer funding need. It's impossible to fund it all. So we can develop a prioritization methodology that we're going to use for when funding becomes available. We're applying this methodology hopefully to identify what projects should be funded, but then the needs change so frequently as well. Development comes in, or a new metro station is being built that, we can't plan 40 years ahead at this time. We need to stay a little bit more flexible. This will mention the funding needs, and then we will need to work towards, getting the funding with the Board of Supervisors or other funding sources.
So when I look at this list and then the rest of it all that you provided the other day, it's huge. It's money that, like in one sense, a lot of this stuff is stuff that the TSB should be thinking about and focusing on. There are all these staff positions. There's just a huge outlay. So I'm trying to figure out how realistic is this? Is it just a wish list of everything you could possibly think of, and then it's going to be prioritized later? because that's, then I don't understand how, like, if you were to do, if this is what the actual county's goal was, like, you have to restructure your whole office to accommodate this. This is a huge amount of work. It's a huge amount of effort. And I'm concerned that we sort of propose this large scale thing, gets out there, that we have no intention or no capacity to fund even a small portion of it. Here, this thing here has this, in this first page, has 2 full-time staff members, but your office is having difficulty with like just a handful of people. It's like, this is not, doesn't feel realistic at all. It feels aspirational. It's great, but like, I don't understand how we go from this to the purpose of having this, going to, safe streets. I just can't make that connection.
Well, plus FCDOT is taking over Park Authority's funding too in this document, so it's the lead agency for trails. So good luck.
Yeah, so we're actually asking for funding for other agencies here as well. So for example, FCPS, and sometimes they actually ask us to help them or apply for a grant on their behalf. So it's possible to shift funding around, and we acknowledge it costs a lot, but the reason we have so many issues and why the system is not maintained is we don't have enough staff to do everything, not even the current need, not even looking at this document, we don't have enough staff to even keep up with this current demands for active transportation because of the scale of the county. Montgomery County has, I think, 15 people working active transportation. We have like 4 or 5 people that kind of try to juggle some of these things, but we don't have enough staff to fulfill really the needs, and so especially when it comes to data research and whatnot. So, but it's possible. I mean, we have asked for staff, or we regularly ask for staff. We have traded staff positions, so it wouldn't even increase the budget. But if there's a vacancy somewhere, it's possible to trade basically the position within the department. So there are creative ways. Grants is another option, or we can work with consultants. So it's some of these is more aspirational than others. There needs to be political will and creative funding for sure. But if you consider how much money we spend on transportation projects in the county, the scale looks probably bigger for some other departments that don't have as much funding as transportation has. But it's still a lot of money for sure.
No, I think it's a huge amount of money, and I don't know why Fairfax won't staff up to do what it needs to do. I mean, if this is what we're putting forward as programs, like we have to reorganize your whole FCDOT to make it happen. I mean, you can't just steal somebody from here and grant money that thing. You can't get to 15 people that way.
Yeah, I don't think we need 15. Let's start with 1 for the Safe Streets program. Like there needs to be someone that can actually work on this full time. And then we're still like 1 support person short that we actually traded David for. So David is a trade because we couldn't hire someone as a transportation planner 2. So we upgraded the position to a transportation planner 3 to even be competitive in the market for active transportation planners. So that's an additional challenge to even find staff that would work for us under the conditions that we have. So there's a lot of things to consider, but I don't want to spend too much time on this section because I know there are other sections that are also very important to, especially when it comes to design and education and all that. So I just want to ask if there's a last question on the governance segment before you move on.
I do have another question. I appreciate that James brought up the fact that there is no dedicated funding for this. Does it include like a commitment from the board to look into that? Is there is there any other kind of way to get these things to happen? Because without that, there doesn't seem to be. Like some of these governance things seem really wishful thinking.
So let me just jump in. I mean, what we're are talking about and strategizing on is really how to best deliver this message. We are aware that there are significant budget implications to this, And that's why we packaged it as, short-term, long-term, medium-term. And that we're always in a budget constrained environment. However, we've been asked as staff, on behalf of the board, what would it take to make our streets safer? And so these are the way we're approaching this is the technical information that we've compiled to answer that question. How we deliver this message, how the message is absorbed by the Board of Supervisors and ultimately, acted upon, short-term, medium-term, long-term, is really the tricky part here, because as we've just been discussing, some of these are heavy lifts, and many of them are, increasing funding for multiple agencies to make up for shortcomings. So, we don't want, as staff, we've discussed, how do we deliver this message? How do we provide this narrative? And the approach that you see in front of you is part of how we deliver this narrative. We don't want this to be dead on arrival. If we take it to the board and it's got a $1 billion price tag, we don't want it to be dead on arrival. Furthermore, we don't want to put the board in a position to be accused of not doing anything because they don't have billions of dollars that they're sitting on to just do all these things at one time. So that's really the strategy that staff is developing, and how we present the correct technical recommendations to leadership that is fiscally constrained, and yet try and give the board different options and flexibility to be able to do, what we can do, again, with this whole concept of short-term, medium-term, and long-term. Ultimately, to answer your question, it will be for the county executive and the Board of Supervisors to figure out, how and when to be able to do some of these things. And that's why, to us, we think an important first step is to set up a staff position and maybe a task force that can help provide that information moving forward to the policymakers that have to make these decisions.
What was the basis for choosing short-term, medium-term, and long-term?
So again, it's how difficult it is to implement. So a short-term measure, maybe the short-terms are probably the more realistic ones, with potentially, that could work in the next 5 years. There's maybe enough either money or staff capacity, or a possibility to, again, for example, installing that safe street program manager. It's possible just by shifting potentially staff around without a budget impact. So there are ways to achieve some of these short-term measures, which are a little bit easier. But then once you get into the medium, it becomes either costly or either politically more difficult, or because of who the partners are that would need to have the buy-in for that recommendation, particularly when it comes to VDOT, the impacts there, and their ability to coordinate with us on that, or willingness, and that's and once you get into policies where the state has a say, it's all politics at that point. Do they want to adopt certain policies that we favor? We have no influence over that. So those are more of the long-term goals that we want to work towards, because they're important, but they may never be achieved, or it may take some time to achieve them. So we took it was a judgment, staff judgment based on how we guess this will go, but it's not based on priority. So some of these medium or long-term items are high priorities.
Thanks. That answers the question. But what you did not say was that there was an attempt by staff to render a judgment as to which would contribute more or less on safety.
So that's, I think, what I started out with when I started talking about this, that we started out with that perspective to assign priority based on impact, and it ended up nearly everything was a high priority. So it lost its value to a certain extent. And then we also don't want to assign high priority to a very costly item or a item that needs political stakeholder feedback, because it just doesn't, it puts pressure, unfair pressure on some of the political stakeholders that it looks like, you know, they're not doing something that's really important because they have their own issues for why they're choosing or have restraints as well. So this was just a more, I think, and that's where we talk about the fatal flaws. We don't want this to be dead on arrival. We want to provide, you know, these are the options, provide the education on what the options are or the recommendations are, and then kind of take it from there, work towards some of these recommendations without setting them in stone. And the prioritization made that was not necessarily helping our cause, I think. So we changed it to the short, medium, and long-term approach strategically. But again, they're all important. Some may be more important than others, but then when you start thinking about it, how would you prioritize all of this? It's really hard to do.
Nicole, this is Kevin. You might want to consider dropping term out, because the header of it is time frame, and you could have it be short, medium, or long. Term seems to introduce a little bit of the prioritization.
Okay.
Let me ask you a question on this particular page. What's the number one thing that would have the biggest impact? There has to be a number one thing. Like I want to go along with what Ken said. I disagree with the idea of just framing it so that the Board of Supervisors has cover. I mean, our responsibility is to protect the citizens of this county. So like, if your proposal is you have to do X to do that, like they can vote it down, but like, how is that effective? I mean, how is that appropriate for a document that's supposed to be a safety plan?
Right. The problem is there's no silver bullet. There's no one thing that will do it. It's really a multi-pronged approach. It takes a village to build a safe community. So I can't even pick one or even two or three that by themselves would fix the problem. And I think that that's because it's systemic. It's not, you know, someone did something wrong and here is the mess we have. It's, you know, it's a lot of things that need to change or need funding or we need to work on to inch forward to you know, a safer transportation system. And I think that's why prioritizing is so difficult. But providing the short, medium, long-term kind of guide on, you know, helps with, you know, breaking it down a little bit. Okay, we can get started on this and we can have, you know, the low-hanging fruit and then work towards the more heavy lifts in the future. And we will see safety improvements along the way, but it will, unless we, you know, lower the speed limit to 15 miles an hour across the entire Fairfax County area, that would probably be a silver bullet, but that's also not feasible.
Well,
or would
my
lead to
last
much
comment,
complaints.
because I want to get over this, is then I would put down impact, not timeline. I would put biggest impact, big impact, middle, and less impact. You can do it. You can identify which one of these is more useful than the others, and that's how I would frame it for them, as opposed to the time frame. That's.
Yeah, we can look into it. It's just I tried it and I wasn't particularly successful. But if you want to take a stab at it, I'm definitely open for ideas if you have a prioritization in mind. And we can keep that track in a, you know, we can ask different committees to rank their, you know, have the columns of what your priorities as a committee are as a next step, I think. But getting this adopted is definitely first important step to work towards.
I think that would be a definite advantage to using this committee and the expertise that sits in this committee to go through each of the sections. And I'm not doing this just for the section we're on. This is a general comment. And have everybody pick out what they think is number 1, 2, and 3 to accomplish the goals of that section. So for this section, okay, you have the governance section. So I would like to know, we could do this over the next month, what everybody in the committee thought will be the number 1, 2, and 3 impact things for the governance of safety, not just for safety in general, but this is the section on governance. So for the governance of safety, which do you think would be the biggest impact? And then looked ahead, so I know your other sections. So it's always going to be a judgment call. I agree with you, Nicole, and I know you're sitting in your office going, this is just going to be my opinion. It's too subjective. But again, crowdsourcing on this among a panel of essentially experts, it would be a valuable input. And in fact, you could feed that back to you put that in your report committee that this would have the impact. It would be obvious which are long-term and it's going to take a long time to get them done. You've already made those assessments, but that you can make a judgment about that, but that's just my suggestion.
Okay, that's a great idea. And it will help us as staff also working once this is adopted or endorsed by the Board of Supervisors to kind of focus our time on those big points. But yeah, it's a challenge. So I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are. Are we ready to move to the next section?
I have one final question, Nicole.
Okay.
I'll keep it short and hopefully your answer can be as brief. You might have said this and I might have missed it. I think James Albright asked it, but I'm not sure I caught the answer. But this is a safety program plan. How does this relate to the active Fairfax transportation plan? Because it looks like some of these or many of these items actually are part of the active Fairfax training plan. Is this an annex? Is it a standalone document? I think I might have missed it at the beginning, but if you could just briefly put me to rights on that, I'd appreciate it.
Sure, good question. So it's both. So it's somewhat of a standalone document that we can start using before the whole plan is adopted. So that's why we go into the board asking for action, and then we can pretty much start working on it. And that's following the board motion on kind of speeding up the work on safety. So that's why it's written that way, but it's still going to be part of the final report as well. So if you compare what the document we're producing with what Arlington just published, because it was a completely standalone effort, their Vision Zero action plan, it's like a 40-50 page document, and that's not what we're going to produce here. So our document will look more like their executive summary because it is part of this bigger report or the bigger plan. So as a reminder, the active transportation plan is going to be partly a comp plan amendment, but it will also have elements that will not go into the comp plan. That's probably one of them. So this will not go in the as is into the comp plan. This is more for internal use.
Appreciate that. And is the Transportation Advisory Committee involved with this as well as the Trails, Sidewalks, and Bikeways Committee? Because it seems like a lot of items fall in their bailiwick as well.
They are. So they just informed me they will probably not be able to see it or have a meeting on it before the BTC, but definitely before the September board action. So we may need to meet with them in July, but I'm hoping to be able to share the document with them for review and comment, and then have the meeting about it after the BTC. So they were not able to fit us in onto the agenda, but they're definitely involved in the current kind of production of documents and review at the same level as this committee.
Thank you.
Sure. All right, moving on to the next section, which is a short one, equity and social justice. So it has some recommendations on prioritizing vulnerable populations and some ideas on engagement, meaningful engagement. And as someone previously asked why walk audits are listed here as a medium term. So just wanted to point out it's because of the funding attached. So working with at-risk populations, it's important to not just do the walk audit and then leave and nothing happens, but to build the trust, it's important to have immediate results, like something that comes out of it that is tangible. So the idea here is to if you do something, take a walk audit, that we would have funding available to actually implement changes and build that type of community support that way. So any questions on this segment? All right, then moving on to safety
Nicole,
through
this is Beth.
education. Okay, go ahead, Beth.
You might want to add park authority in there. I didn't see anything for park authority. Unless you're just talking about sidewalks. I'm not sure.
On all of those? Yeah, that's a good idea because we, on this
I wasn't sure if
specific
your
one,
walk audits. I don't know if the walk audits are for streets only or for all facilities.
it could include parks. So there's a lot of interest in this community, which we know from our outreach on recreational trail use. So that's definitely an aspect. Accessing parks, accessing trails, which could be definitely part of a walk audit. Great point, thank you. Right, so safety through education has, you know, we have done education in the past, like there's some materials available, campaigns. It's probably something we can do with available funding. So that's a short term, some of those low hanging things like internal training that can be done, working with public sector. We have a program in place that already does that to an extent, but could, you know, ramp up efforts or do it differently. So that's something that can be handled in the short term. But then we get into like Fcps coordination, and that goes back to, again, a really good discussion we had with them on how they envision the future of their program, and they definitely would like to see something more like Montgomery County. That's a stronger partnership between FCDOT and FCPS, but also potentially moving their Safe Routes to School coordinator into the transportation section instead of having it currently in the, I think, in the health or like the educational focus. So that's already kind of in the moves. But the current coordinator is funded through a grant, so it limits her to elementary schools and middle schools. But ideally, we would want to reach K through 12. So having our own a dedicated staff person, our own program would give us more flexibility to include all schools. And then also supplement funding for infrastructure improvements through our TPP, for example, because the grant funding is very little considering the scale of our needs. But then also education for adults, of course, particularly drivers, some websites, like information online on safety information, and some different type of outreach ideas. Oh, and enforcement is under education these days. You may be familiar with that enforcement is no longer an E when it comes to active transportation planning. So that's now integrated into education, and the focus is on automated enforcement for equity reasons and safety of a different kind. So any questions on the education piece?
Yeah, this is Jim. You just triggered something, and when you talked about enforcement and automated enforcement versus, and it kind of goes into engineering, but the engineering design, the roadways can be self-enforcing by the design, you know, so, I mean, I would rather see that. I'd rather see our roads, you know, scaled back to design the speed you want them to go, rather than have a bunch of speed cameras and stuff, you know, spying on me all the time.
Yeah, one of my favorite sayings is if you need to enforce speed on your road, you designed the road wrong. So there's a lot of truth to that.
I'm not sure how you can flag that. Maybe it's in the engineering or not. But
it's in the engineering segment.
Okay.
There's a whole segment on speed management and whatnot. But first here we have the safety through policy and comprehensive planning, which is a pretty long segment. It talks about you know, policies, like a complete streets policy and safe streets policy, obviously. And those are more short-term and low-hanging fruit because they don't cost anything. They just have to be put together and then adopted. And there is potentially enough political will. We not kind of just need to work through that effort to get everything in place. and prioritize, some of the implementation of safety improvements, policy that would help, for example, with maintenance, and that's fairly common in other jurisdictions where the adjacent homeowner or property owner has a shared responsibility to maintain the sidewalk and trail in front of their property. That doesn't exist in Fairfax County because of ADA concerns. But then we also have ADA concerns when the trails and sidewalks are littered with debris and are not cleared for snow and ice. So the board has looked at this issue specifically multiple times. But now we have a different board, and hopefully maybe if we include it as part of, this is a safety concerns. People are literally walking in the street when the sidewalks are blocked on high-speed streets, sometimes school children. It's a real safety issue and potentially something that could be addressed fairly easily through a policy, at least partly addressed. So maintenance was a very recurrent topic over and over in the public outreach, but also speaking to the supervisors individually. It was probably one of the most common topics mentioned. So we have some recommendations on maintenance, particularly determining maintenance responsibility. We have a lot of sidewalks and trails in the county that nobody's responsible for. So if you look at our maintenance responsibility map, those are, I think, highlighted in orange. And if you look at kind of older activity centers, many of these have, and that's, you can tell that nobody has maintained these in 60 years because they're not assigned to anyone. They're not maintained by VDOT, not maintained by FCDOT. So kind of determining or assigning responsibility and then providing that funding to actually maintain those is an important step. Updating comprehensive plans, those are pretty straightforward.
Nicole, so Bob, I'm sorry, can I interrupt for a minute? I think
Sure.
Bob has his hand up. I had a question about an earlier answer too. Bob. All right, well, I'll speak, and then Bob, if you want to come off mute, if you have your hand up. So I guess you started to talk about the difference between some of these which were policy and others that might be more resource intensive. So I wonder if another metric or qualifier here that you could put as another column would be resource, right? So if you added some quantification or semi-quantitative terms to that, that might help us. And then I just wanted to, since you described the safe routes to school, I just wanted to speak in favor of funding that position. So I know probably most of us or many of us have heard Sally Smallwood speak, but that's just such a great program and really, one that I wanted to advocate for funding that position. I know we've talked about the difficulty of adding staff, but clearly you guys have identified some really important positions that could result in ongoing impact. So thanks.
Sure, yeah, and we have already been directed to at least look at creating at least a budget range for particularly the short-term measures. So we're not quite sure if those will be ready for the BTC presentation, but most likely for the board action in September, so that the board is aware of what they're getting themselves into, at least financially in some of these. So some of these have pretty big ballpark, others are more on the easier side, but even if it's a policy, it takes staff, sometimes a consultant to develop it, and it's still, it may not be $1 million, but maybe $50,000 or $100,000 that still needs to come from somewhere. If you want to do it correctly. Right.
Okay. Nicole, can I break in here for a minute?
Sure.
We have to announce public input period. And if there is none, then I guess Ken, she could go on with her second item.
Yeah, Bob, sorry about that. Yeah. Are there any members of the public present?
All right, so it looks like we did have somebody join as we were going. Sheila, I'm gonna make you a panelist, so you should be able to unmute yourself if you want to jump in.
Yeah, Sheila, we put aside a portion of our meeting. We have to for anybody in the public, not on the committee, to ask a question, comment. Actually, the floor is available to you should you want to do it. And now's the time to do it. So the floor is yours.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Oh, okay, thank you. I was just listening in tonight, just to hear there was one of our homeowners had an issue, but she wasn't able to attend, and so I think she'll bring it up maybe at a later meeting.
Okay, so we'd be happy to entertain any questions that you might have, but you're always welcome. You or she are.
Well, thank you.
One note, however, I don't know how late you joined us, but probably starting next month, provided the governor rescinds the emergency order, we will be meeting in person. So we will be at the government center, and members of the public can certainly attend there, but we have to be in person. Whatever's not forbidden is required, so we have to meet in person. So this is probably the last meeting in this format.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Okay, Nicole, please continue.
Sure, and I just want to briefly mention that second item I had. Can I just email you all the, because it's a similar list. And it's actually not fully ready yet, so I wasn't even able to share tonight. I just wanted to go over kind of like what we were planning on doing with it. But we have a few minutes to continue this, I guess, and I can just speak 2 minutes about the other topic after this. That's okay.
Yeah, certainly. You can certainly email us documents, but you cannot collect electronic comments on your documents. That's an electronic meeting, and we're not allowed to do that.
Even if I send it individually to all of you, and then you can only respond to me?
Yeah, I think that's fine. That would be fine.
Yeah, I think that's what the attack told me I had to do. So I would need to get all your email addresses and then send it to you individually.
Yeah,
but I can't send it to all of you, and we can't, have those comments shared among each other.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know, just so we don't run afoul of FOIA. From what I recall from just, the beginning of doing these online meetings is that we're not to conduct committee business sort of like over email. So the part of the reason, like, I would send emails to everyone BCC'd just for like, just basic announcements of meetings coming up is just so we didn't have email chains created where there is, the possibility of a meeting in that sense. So I don't know if that's an acceptable thing to do. Sorry.
Yeah, but if she sends it out BCC, we can't reply to it, right? I mean.
Right. I think the key is to send it to everyone
communications.
individually, not to the group as a whole. Because then it would be
You
in
can
one-on-one
BCC
conversation.
us. It's one email for you. You BCC us and you tell
Okay.
us we have to reply directly to you. Then there is the only way we can communicate is one way.
Okay. All right, sounds good.
Okay.
All right. Where was I? All right, so I just want to point out the speed limit in Virginia has now changed to a minimum of 15 miles per hour under certain circumstances from 25 minimum. So that's a positive improvement. My understanding is it has to be signed. It's not statutory. So not all neighborhoods all of a sudden have 50 miles per hour speed limits, but you have to sign it that way. But I'm still getting I've asked the county attorney for a legal opinion about how exactly this is supposed to work. So that's why this is included here as, this is a great possibility, but it's still medium term because it does involve some funding for signage and probably a lot of stakeholder buy-in. Even though the state level actually made that change quickly, I think changing a speed limit in a neighborhood, as our traffic calming staff can tell you, is probably more of a contentious issue. But it's an important tool in our toolbox, particularly in school zones or very busy pedestrian areas. Let's see, anything else I want to point out here? Oh yeah, and on the similar vein, I've included something here about the Slow Streets program. If you're wondering why that would be in addition to the traffic calming program, so that was done in coordination with the traffic calming program. They didn't see that they can change the program that they have because of the way it currently works, but they would be supportive of a Slow Streets program that would supplement their program. So the Slow Streets program would not try to duplicate, but it would extend the eligibility, for example. For example, cul-de-sac currently can't get traffic calming, but maybe that type of program that's locally run and not run by the state in coordination with VDOT, of course, could potentially get, for example, the 15 miles per hour street signs or other treatments that would be TBD to help kind of slow the speed on some of these streets. And the name actually comes from the COVID kind of pandemic type, what's it called, a makeshift kind of closed streets or a traffic calm streets. But it's definitely a benefit to make something like that permanently and expand eligibility.
Nicole, you, in the earlier document you sent to us, you had I think a section on transferring the VDOT controlled pathways to county to the county.
Correct.
Is that out of here, or did I miss it?
That was taken out this morning.
Okay.
So I think it's still a worthy goal exploring, but it seemed like that wasn't the problem per se. The problem is more that VDOT needs more funding. So it is confusing that there are so many different entities responsible for the maintenance, but it's a problem we could solve with more funding all around. And FCDOT actually, or the county, can provide VDOT with more funding if we wanted to help maintain. So right now, they, for example, get paid extra by the county to mow the lawn more than other jurisdictions. So their funding usually solves half the problems. So that was the approach that I was directed to use this morning. We can further explore the merits of actually taking it all over, but as long as everyone plays their part and especially identifies the responsibility for those lost sidewalks that nobody maintains or trails, those are really the ones that are in the worst shape. You can usually tell when you see one of those where nothing would ever happen until we have some responsibility there. So that was the kind of change that we made this morning. But thanks for pointing that out. Also, I want to point out a change. I think it was in the document you received yesterday, but the next one, the speed tolerance of enforcement, is usually 10 miles per hour. We originally proposed 2 miles per hour, but FCPD said that's still within that range of their equipment where somebody could go the speed limit, but it looks like they're going 3 over. So 5 was the absolute minimum they can enforce. So that's why it says 5. Any questions on the policy and comprehensive planning section? Right. Moving on to the very long design and engineering category. Maybe know that a lot of the issues are design and engineering related. We talked about the need to design our street differently, prioritize active transportation users, implement infrastructure more efficiently and maybe with short-term measures that of course we need to develop in coordination with VDOT. Improving existing facilities, of course, to prioritize safety, not just throughput, and safety of all users, particularly vulnerable road users. Let's see. Oh, this is an important one, the speed limit. So currently, you're probably well aware how our speed studies determine the speed limit on the roads. and it's usually based on how fast people drive. And then they choose the 85th percentile, basically to not penalize half the population that uses the road that they're speeding, which is quite backwards when it comes to safety. And one of the tools they use is US Limit 2, which is luckily being updated right now to be a little bit more, up with the times and safety focused. But currently the tool basically determines that if a road has lower than average crashes, it's okay to raise the speed limit, which is exactly the opposite. Instead of saying, okay, there are crashes, we need to lower the speed limit further to, eliminate the crashes, actually thinks it's okay to have crashes and recommend a higher speed limit than the road currently has. So that's very problematic for obvious reasons. But one of the possibilities is say, could use engineering judgment. So there are other ways of setting the speed limit. VDOT prefers to do it this way. We could potentially work with VDOT on using the 50th percentile instead of the 85th percentile, which is something we should be able to do based on national guidelines. So that's a step forward. And that's why it's a short-term recommendation. We'll accept it's a different question, but so it's a best practice. And that's what the consultant tells us too. It's kind of like, it's not ideal, but the 50 percentile makes a huge difference in comparison to the 85th. So it's a significant drop in the speed limit.
It should absolutely be a central tendency that we use to protect public health. Using an upper bound on the distribution is insane. Thank you for including that. And I also want to recognize what a great deal it is that the state lowered to 15. That's great news. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, that was really surprising news. That is very helpful. Bus stop locations are a big issue in the county sometimes that you can get to one side of the bus stop safely, but then the other side is hard to reach. There's not necessarily a safe crosswalk to get there. So it calls out some of those engineering issues that we are already aware of. A complete streets design guide would be helpful. I feel like the engineering section is a little bit easier to prioritize impact-wise than some of the other more policy-oriented things. So, speed is always, priority number one. And then, have like pilots and some other ideas here that have to do with speed reduction or control as well.
Is this what the deputy county executive talked to us about a few months ago?
Which specifically?
The complete streets design concept? Yeah.
Kinda. So yes, so there is a complete streets policy that you would like to see, which basically just states, design all the streets with all users in mind, yada, yada, yada. But then there's also a complete streets design guide. And if you're interested in what that looked like, one of the best ones I've seen so far for suburban areas and one Montgomery County put together. And it really shows in cross sections, how types of streets should be designed ideally. And it's not just the 2D cross sections, but it's a 3D cross section. So it really shows kind of not what the corridor is supposed to look like with some of the supporting infrastructure as well. So it's really nicely done and includes trails, which is something you don't necessarily see in some of the other complete streets designs, which are very urban. So since we have a lot of trails in our network.
Nicole?
Yeah.
I'm going back to the speed thing. I've heard of the way they establish the speed limits and the ways you described. Are there no objective tools to use to establish speed limits?
That is the objective tool, unfortunately. So that's why it's so popular.
Like a mechanical tool that says you have this many lateral G forces, you're turning at this rate, you have this degree.
That's what this tool is.
Okay.
So you can go online and if you Google it, you can probably use it. And it basically asks like what, how many cars, how many lanes, design, how many, it actually asks like how fast are the cars currently going. That's why it's called a speed study. But then it asks like how many, is high pedestrian volumes present, number of signalized intersections, number of driveways, and then it spits out a number. It's a recommendation, but it's often used to set the speed limit.
I was talking about something more in terms of an inclinometer that would say there's this much lateral force on your tires. You're going, this turn can only be but this speed because of the angle of the road and the amount of G-forces it generates. What?
Right, that's
Is
a
there-
design speed you're referring to. So there's a posted speed and there's a design speed. And often the design speed, and there's another recommendation here somewhere that says the design speed shouldn't be higher than the posted speed, because often it's higher. So VIDA and FCDOT specifically designed the design speed higher than the posted speed, sometimes 10 miles per hour higher, knowing that cars go 10 miles per hour over the posted speed limit for safety reasons, which obviously has also, negative safety consequences for other road users. But that's the current practice. But there are other ways to set speed limits based on, land use or other, speed areas. So have a low speed area because there are high pedestrian volumes in the area. But the most common tool used, not just in Virginia, but nationwide, is the US Limit 2 or something similar.
Does the tool ever ask about bicycles?
No, I don't think so. I think they're kind of grouped into pedestrians, and it's pretty vague. It just says they're high pedestrian volumes or low pedestrian volumes without much of a explanation. So I clicked on a little button. I just got a one-day training on this, which was very infuriating, but also very educational. There's a button you can click on, and it basically pops up a little box that says, are there sidewalks present? And that's their definition of high pedestrian volume. So I think that's one thing they're updating right now to be a little bit more specific about, this is an urban area versus this is a rural area, or, certain numbers of pedestrians. It really doesn't ask about that. So it's a couple of decades old, probably. It's not a recent tool. It's how we have set speed limits since probably the 1970s.
So much of that regarding the pedestrians just doesn't make any sense at all.
Yes, it's not designed for multimodal. It's just designed to make enforcement reasonable, I guess.
So we're reaching a point where we're gonna have to wrap it up. Any key issues that you have not covered?
Not on this one. I just want to point out the other document. Actually, there is actually a whole evaluation section that I don't need to go over in detail. I just want to mention on the other document I will share with you, which are, so we have the vision and goals we went over in detail last time, but now under the objectives, we are developing specific strategies and then some metrics. And that's what I want to share with you once we have it internally reviewed. So it's not ready yet. So I wasn't able to share that anywhere as I originally had hoped. But we were still hoping to get that to the BTC for review on the 29th as well, because they don't meet over the summer. So we're rushing it a little bit here, but it would be helpful to have, because it kind of explains the goals and objectives a little bit better. And it would be very helpful to have your thoughts on specific strategies.
Nicole, I have a question. There's a lot to go through, and do you have a general time frame when we can get you when you need comments for? If you're going to the board's committee on the 29th of this month, when are you looking to get comments from us? Because I think you said this is the one we have is in the most recent document. So
yeah, we will share.
What time frame are you looking for comments?
June 17th would be the cutoff, because we need to have the presentation and materials ready on the 22nd. And that gives me some time to make some edits. So earlier the better.
Yeah, the only big comment I would make is that looking at it in terms of implementing agency, there is no way that FCDOT can handle all of that work. I mean, it's just not possible given the complexities and the agencies involved. I'd recommend you drop that category right now and just put just a list of agencies that may be involved.
Stakeholders.
there's no way that you can handle trail park maintenance. And I mean, I know it sets up a weird expectation, I think, for you guys, the way it's laid out. And I think you should just put, here's all the various agencies involved with all of these facilities. And like, this is kind of what has to get involved. But I think leaving you guys as the lead agency for almost every single one of these is just a little bit overwhelming.
Just a little.
That's a good point. And it's just supposed to be not, we are responsible for this. It's just like kind of taking the lead in getting, like working on this and kind of coordinating between the agencies, not FCDOT will, but we can word it a little bit better.
I struggle because, there's streets and there's recreation, and they're not the same. And yet they're in a document that says safe streets, which isn't recreation. And so it has a weird, setup to it where like trails are like thrown in, like it's in trails. Like trails is a big thing that has a big, it has a lot of other different things that aren't streets. And so I struggle trying to figure out how to react to these documents because it's set from such a DOT mind frame and like, oh yeah, and trails, so it's, I would take yourselves off the lead agency for right now. You can decide that later. But I think if you're going to have these big items with all of these agencies involved, maybe you just don't talk about lead agency, but you just explain that, look at all the people that have to get involved on this stuff and have various responsibilities. I think that speaks better to the topic than the way it's kind of being presented as an expectation that this is all going to be a DOT thing. So that's just my thought on
that's a good point.
Document.
Yeah, this is Jim.
Thank you.
This is Jim. I want to second what Beth just said. I was going to say something similar, but the notion that Fairfax County DOT can take all this on is ridiculous, and that the trail component of it is really left out of the whole thing. I mean, it's just unfortunate. I think it's a really great document, don't get me wrong, but it really doesn't speak to the whole segment of our population that uses active transportation, that they're on trails and that they have to get from these trails to their homes, and that's a challenge, life-threatening challenge in many cases. So I really wish that you could find a carve out or some way to make this sort of sense of trail part of this document in some way that would really make it. It's really good now, but it would really make it a lot better. So
I mean, the hard part is that we meet different standards of design. I mean, from just the sheer definition of it. I mean, even when it comes to ADA, streets don't follow the same ADA requirements that trails do, and that's going to mean a different inherent thing for safety. So, it's, I struggle a lot because, we're trying to shove it all into, 50 pounds of potatoes in a 2-cent sack. And it's just, hard to know how to make all these things fit together.
And there's no clean dividing line. I mean, there are trails that are critical components of the county's transportation network. So as you know, Beth, so yeah.
I can give you one good quick example of the Mount Vernon District park that is heavily used by kids on mountain bikes. But to get there, they have to ride along Fort Hunt Road, and they jump out of that park right at a very high accident-prone area. And luckily, with this repaving thing, we've been working closely with Supervisor Stork and VDOT and Fairfax County DOT to get the striping a little bit more friendly to bicycles. So, I think that's what I really like about when you said about buses. You sort of systematically worked to move the bus stops as part of a process. And in the same way, the repaving, any of the repaving can do that, not just create bike lanes, but get the turning radii to meet standards. And I just had pointed out to VDOT very recently that the new legislation for crosswalks at unsignalized intersections now, where the speed is 35 miles or less, those motorists now have to stop for pedestrians in those crosswalks. I think as of July 1. So, you need a whole different system, a way of dealing with roads that are 35-mile-per-hour roads or less that are used heavily by people walking to parks or getting to trails or riding from here to there, where they have a few safe segments, but not much in between. So I think that's, to me, that would be the angle that I would pick. I would just try getting two parks, getting two places where you have to use a variety of systems to get there using active or human powered transportation.
Yeah, I almost thought of like where they intersect, like where when you leave the road and you enter a trail, that sort of thing. I know there are different sort of building of new categories of trails, like there are commuter trails, which this would apply to. But it's just hard reconciling those two types of vastly different worlds in what a lot of this document speaks to. And so, you know, I'm not sure. I'll provide you some more comments, but I just want to kind of put my big general thought out there.
Yeah, that's a fair criticism. I guess most of our safety concerns are car related. So there are some particularly perceived safety concerns on trails, but you know, people are dying on our streets. So that's really what this document is about. It's about the cars and how to deal with that kind of issue between vulnerable road users and in our transportation network. So the safe spaces are our trails. Like they are not our problem, they're our solution. That's part of the complete streets design, but also kind of the general kind of you know, active transportation network design. And once you look at the and it feels very in the big context of active Fairfax, this feels very kind of street heavy because of that. But if you look at the vision and goals and the strategies there, those will have a much heavier focus on trails, because that's the good stuff. That's what we want to get to. Yes, there are the crossings where trails intersect with the road, the issue, but the issue there is not necessarily different from a normal intersection, or a lot of this applies to that as well. But I can take a look and see if I can get that trail safety in there. We did hear a lot about, you know, the perceived safety on the WD, for example, like the volumes, but the actual safety hazard is still where the trail crosses a road.
Well, I could just say something really quickly, is that you have safe routes to parks. There's a big push for safe routes to schools, but you don't mention safe routes to parks. So that would be one easy way to do it. You know, you just
safe routes to schools is its own program, I think. Yeah, it's
and I think they're trying to make
standing alone.
I think trying to make safe routes to parks equally as thing. And you had a great program a year or two ago about safe routes to churches or something. You know, had a ride for churches, which I thought was fantastic.
That's exactly the problem.
So,
once we start getting into the destinations, we have safe routes to work and safe routes to transit. So the problem is you need to have safe routes to all destinations, but safe routes to school, it's its own standalone program.
Well, and that's the
that
problem.
Has also this like education section as part of it.
But that's the whole problem, is that it needs to be thought of systematically. Schools are great because they get people early on in their education, but you know, everybody can benefit. Not everybody goes to school. In fact, it's a very small segment really, but a lot of people would benefit by being able to get to a park or get to a shopping area, get to a library, whatever. Safe routes to anything is what I would call it, you know, and I think you would be better off. I would like to see this document really spelled more clearly out, you know, those kinds of things. But otherwise, I just don't want to downplay it. It's a fantastic, there's a grab bag of everything and it's all good, you know, so I'm very excited about it.
Right, thank you. That's a helpful comment.
Anybody else have any critical comments here? Well, I knew if we were going to talk about safety, we would definitely consume our entire time, which is one of the reasons why I love being involved in this committee, because everybody's passionate about this subject. So I think, Nicole, you got more than what you needed in terms of feedback, and so we can at least clear the decks of this issue, and let's find out if anybody else on the committee has any other critical issues they wanted to bring up for tonight.
This is Jim. I did sneak in my comment about the new law about unsignalized intersections and crosswalks. So I hope everybody picked that up. So,
we did.
Thank you. All right.
That is cool. I like that. Oh, goodness. Well, Nicole, I think you silenced the whole committee, which is probably a new record. So I think we are finished, and motion would be in order.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
So the time is 9:07 p.m. and we will see you probably at the Government Center next month, rather. 14th of July. Good night,
Sounds
everybody.
good. Bye.
Have a good night.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Bye, everyone.